The Heart of It.
Roy West kicking in towards the centre.
A distinctly Tasmanian conversation.
I can feel what it will be like when Tassie plays his first game, and I just...
Lynch gathers, he's got loose men everywhere, but he decides to have a pump shot, and it's an absolute ripper! 200 goals for Peter Hudson. What a fantastic effort.
How did he do that? Bear kick finishes off in style.
Up towards half forward, Stewart flying over the top. Oh, pulled in a beautiful mark.
Well done from Scott. After all, Shredder's got the first goal. Has it done?
Nichols has had the big ruck with it. Oh! Crosswell!
G'day, welcome to The Heart of It, a distinctly Tasmanian conversation. I'm Alistair Nicholson. Today, the untold full story of one of Australian football's greatest ever players. In his own words, Ian Stewart for the first time details the harsh environment that gave rise to his immense football talents. Stewart spent his early years on Tasmania's west coast, but the breakdown of his parents' relationship led to a childhood experience that was more harsh, more rugged than the landscape he once called home. Football became an escape, his salvation, as Stewart's experiences living alongside orphaned migrant children in Hobart's Boys Town helped him build a steely sense of determination and resolve. Rising through the ranks of the Hobart Football Club, he would go on to win premierships with both St Kilda and Richmond, becoming one of only 4 players in the game's history to win 3 Brownlow Medals. This is the incredible story of Ian Stewart.
Queenstown, I was born there. It was quite a rugged sort of place to grow up. Everybody was employed by the Mount Lyell company. There were a lot of migrants there working in the mines. The playing field was stone mashed up, or sand with stone. That's probably why a lot of Tasmanians had great balance. Too scared to fall over.
Your father was a migrant, was he? Italian migrant?
He was. He arrived there, like a lot of migrants, to work in the mines. They were allocated to work in the mines. He was an Italian, full on, Aldo Cervi. He was. He decided, my mother and he broke up when I was about 2 or 3 years of age.
What do you remember about your childhood in Queenstown? What were the types of things that you were doing as a young boy?
What did I remember? Not a lot, because I was then moved to Gormanston, which is 3 k's out of Queenstown, living with my grandmother at the stage. I didn't quite understand at that early stage when my grandmother had a second marriage and there were 5 or 6 kids to that, but I often used to be called that Italian reference, you know. And as a kid, I didn't wonder what the bloody hell they were talking about. It was only when I got a bit older I realised.
Do you remember kicking a footy when you were young
on
the West Coast?
Yeah. That was my salvation. Sport, footy and cricket, yeah, I loved it. Yeah. They were my best friends.
And how big were those sports in that community of the West Coast at the time?
Outside of drinking, that was the biggest occupation.
Tell me about the move when you were 7 years old to Hobart.
Well, my mother was single, or a single mother. There were no such things as a pension, so she had to find work with a young boy, and that was difficult. So I went to a Salesian boys' college. Its name was called Boys Town. You might remember in the late 40s, there was a documentary done on the leaving of Liverpool. That was kids in England that didn't have parents or lost them in the war or didn't want their kids, they put them on ships and sent them out to Australia, and they dropped them off at different boys' towns all around Australia, and I was there when those kids arrived. So that was fairly tough, especially on those kids, 11,000 in those days, miles from anywhere, no parents, nobody, put in an orphanage to start a new life.
Yeah, what can you remember about the Boys Town experience?
Well, I can remember that the kids were very, very flat and lonely, and sadness was everywhere, because they didn't have any visitors, they had nobody. It was a tough experience for them.
So were you living at home or were you living in...
No, I was living there. I was there amongst them. I was living there. I was one of the few boys there that had a visitor. That was my mother once a month.
And where was she living at the time?
Somewhere in the Sandy Bay. She was a housekeeper. The only jobs that she could get was to live in the house and be their cleaner, their cook, their everything. So.
But it was just too hard to have you there as well.
Well, you couldn't have a kid there. Some people wouldn't accept it. So yeah, but eventually I left Boys Town. After a couple of years, 2.5 years or something, I left and went to live with my mother in those jobs that she had around, live-in jobs.
Can you paint the picture for me of what Boys Town was like? Was it dormitories? What was the disciplinary regime like at that school at that time?
It was run by the Salesians, and their order was the Don Bosco order. They were very strong on religion, church every day, and twice on Sundays, whether you were asleep or not. It was a bit sad. It was sad. The priests, the brothers and the fathers there were from all over the world. They had no idea about our game and no idea about cricket. They were Italians, they were this, they were that, They were...
Were you able to indulge those passions in that
yes.
Boys Town environment still?
Yeah, I was. Their remedy for that was that anybody that wanted to play sport, I remember vividly the different priests or brothers throwing me a football. And one brother said to my mother on one of her visits in Italian, your boy, he will be all right. Football will be very, 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 very good. And I remember that. They had the heart in the right place, but they were more there as to a lot of the English kids and some of the other kids that went off the rails a little bit. They were there just to to provide accommodation and some sort of limited education, mainly accommodation.
Yeah.
There were dormitories there, and there were big mess halls and all of that, and they fed you well.
You must have missed your mum terribly during that period, did you?
Yes, I did, yes. Yes, I did. That built up a certain amount of resilience, those sort of things. But there were a lot of people, a lot of boys, a lot worse off than me. And I used to think when my mother visited once a month, and I used to think they never had any visitors, ever. So...
Yeah, it's bloody tough. So those formative years and those experiences, that's a really tough early period in your life. You've moved from the West Coast, you've had to leave your mother's warmth and comfort and live in an environment like that. How did that shape you, do you think, those early years?
I was not sure about resentful, but I was sort of reserved and started to realise that I had limited opportunities and I could see that football or cricket was an opportunity. I could realise that it was going to be up to me if I wanted to be successful.
At what points in your childhood do you remember football became a real point of focus for you?
When I was playing under-19 football with the Hobart under-19 side, who were called McAlbin in those days, I was 14 playing in the under-19s. Incidentally, Trevor Leo was my first coach. So I was very fortunate to have people of that standard coaching the under-19 side. I realised then, because some of the players' fathers used to say, "We'd like to be your manager when you go to Melbourne." So they planted the idea, and I thought, that sounds all right. So that went on for a couple of years. And that gave me a bit of the rainbow at the end to aim for. I didn't come to that realisation that early. One of the reasons why I didn't, I was always playing above myself. So I was playing in a group that's 3 and 4 years older. So obviously they were stronger and better. So as a junior, I was promising, but not dominating. And as I slowly went up the ladder, the last year in the under-19s, I was doing well, but not that well. Then I played my first year with the Hobart Football Club. And
this is senior footy in 1962?
Yeah, senior footy. And in that particular year, the first interstate game against the Victorian Association, I was 19th man.
Was that in Devonport?
It was. Game? Yep. Yeah, yes, it certainly was. And got on at 3/4 time. And I thought to myself, how good's this? One quarter, the VFA were semi-professional footballers, so they weren't very fit. They're all puffing and blowing, and here's this young kid comes on at 3/4 time. Did okay, one quarter, and then 3 or 4 weeks later they picked a Tasmanian team, and I got into that side, and I played on an outstanding footballer in Alistair Lord. And the funny thing about that story is that Alistair Lord that day was nearly best on the ground. And the best thing you could say about me was that I was promising. But after that, the press started saying that this young fella did very well. Then when Alistair Lord won the Brownlow that year, this young Stewart broke even. And after, I beat him. So, the momentum changed, and that's when they started chasing me to play over in Victoria.
We'll come to that in a moment. So playing senior footy at Hobart that year, you make the finals. You're playing with the legendary 3 Ps. Pascoe's the coach, Powell and Payne are playing in that side as well. What are your memories of that Hobart team?
Great. They looked after me, protected me. I got belted a fair bit because I was obviously lighter. Pascoe was a very good coach. Powell was an inspiration in the ruck, and he was a very good ruckman, a very good team player. And Bernie Payne was outstanding. He was another coach of the under-19s that I played under. Blessed I was to have such good coaches.
Yeah. And then at the end of that season, so there's interest from the VFL. How does your move to Melbourne come about, and what level of involvement did you personally have in your departure to Melbourne?
Well, I decided that at the end of the year, after we were paid at the end of the year, and my final payment for the year was £16. We all went to the pub to get paid, and then I bought a ticket to go over to Melbourne. I arrived at Melbourne without any knowledge. They didn't know I was coming. When they found out, they said, "You're too early. We didn't want you for the next year." So they didn't sign me.
This is the Melbourne Football Club?
No, St Kilda.
St Kilda. It was always St Kilda.
Always St Kilda. Well, they were the ones. No, I was being interviewed. I've been spoken to by a number of clubs, but St Kilda. And then I was in Melbourne for 3 months at that period, so it would have been September, October, November, and I hadn't signed with anybody. And then some of the other clubs started to approach me, offered money, and then I told St Kilda that because I wanted them to sign me, and they hadn't signed me, because I wanted to play with any team that Baldock was in. That's where I wanted to be. And eventually they, Ken Hands, who was captain and coach of Carlton at the time, met me and offered me the old brown paper bag with cash in it in a little cafe in Fitzroy Street, St Kilda. And I think there was 2,000 or 3,000 in it, cash. So I rang St Kilda and said that Ken Hands, Carlton have offered me, and I inflated the price, inflated what I said, and they said, "Oh, we'll match it." So that's how I got to sign with St Kilda.
So you were doing all your own wheeling and dealing. You went over there with no guarantees, and you got there too early?
Years too early, yeah.
And they were worried they were going to miss out on you, so
Yeah.
you played them off?
In a way, yeah, in a way. Survivor. That's a bit to do with the background we were speaking about.
Yes, I can see how that would be the case. Your love for Darryl Baldock, and you talk about being determined to play where Baldock was playing, where did that emanate from?
We're all kids in Tasmania junior football, and he was playing, he was dominating in the Northwest Union. He was captain and coach of Latrobe at 20 or something, or 19 or 20, captain and coach. So he's everybody's hero. Everybody's hero, every young footballer. And then when he went to Melbourne, he dominated there, you know. Yeah.
Did you play against him when you were young in Tassie?
No, he was 4 or 5 years older, but he was more mature. He might have been 25, 26, and I might have been 19, but it was more like a young kid and a mature. So all I did was look at him and admire him and respect him and say, well, geez, I'm playing with a hero, you know. But once you got out in the field and he's there and you're there in the team opposition there, you lose all that because somehow you feel that you should be out there. You feel comfortable about being out there. That's your theatre, or that's your stage, that's your arena. So as proud as I was to play in front of Baldock and with him, it was only on the field that I could be not an equal, but to be part. Then after the game, I'd probably follow him around like a dog. But I was a kid, and he was a mature man.
What was it like going to St Kilda? You've got Baldock, Verdon Howes there. He's won the Brownlow in 1959. There are a bunch of Tasmanians. John Bingley's there at the time as well. Did that make life a little easier for you?
A little bit. I remember my 21st Verdon Howe organised that. My mother had come over by this time, and we'd shared an apartment in St Kilda. We had an apartment there. The apartment was just off Fitzroy Street, which was...
Right near the junction.
Yeah, notorious place, notorious. And our little street was off Grey Street, which runs off Fitzroy Street. And it was very unbelievable. You wouldn't put it in recruit. I wonder what the hell. It was very exciting. Gunshots were heard and all this during the evening. So we were there for a couple of years.
So what's a young lad from Hobart thinking when you're in an environment like that in Melbourne?
Well, I'd left a couple of friends in Hobart, and I'd ring them back up and say, you know, how exciting the place was. And I said, you know, it's amazing, the girls. I said, down the bottom of our street, I said, when I go down there to go to the shop to cut through a laneway, an alleyway, I said, everybody speaks to me. And the guys in Tasmania said, who speaks to you? I said, these girls. They said, you silly bugger. They only speak to you because they're working girls. I said, what? I'd never seen any working girls before. So you know, they in Tasmania, young fellas told me who they were, what they were doing. So
they knew more than you.
Yeah, yes.
So the Junction Oval was your home ground initially, isn't it, with St Kilda before the move to Moorabbin?
Magnificent oval, magnificent. Small. I think we were getting 25,000 people there, packed. But it's almost like a coliseum. You're almost in with the crowd. You know, this is great.
Your first game against Melbourne?
It was.
What can you recall of that day?
I was on the wing that day. I was on a very good footballer who'd won a Tassie medal in a carnival called Brian Dixon. Nobody told me what a great mark he was for his size. He's about 6 foot. Had long arms though, like Kevin Murray, had long arms. So I tried to outmark him from behind. Well, did Alan Jones tell me? I thought to myself, you should have told me before the game what a great mark he was, because I used to think I was not quite good mark, high mark. So I got moved onto the other wing at half time. And during that period in the third quarter, Tassie Johnson, who was a fullback from Melbourne, a big fella and a very good fullback, came through and deliberately shirt fronted me and turned me, and I did a somersault in the air and landed and on the back and really knocked the stuffing out of me. You couldn't go off then in those days. You didn't even think about going off, you just thinking about trying to recover. And an interesting thing happened. I recovered and played on, and I went home and I was knocked about. It was a real heavy blow. Big guy running through from the fullback, and there was a knock on the door at this apartment in St Kilda, and it was the central umpire and a boundary umpire, Jeff Crouch. Remember that name?
Yeah, he did a lot of grand finals. Yeah. He might have done your 66 grand final.
He knocked on the thing to see how I was, and the umpires came round. So that's when I first realised that I must be nice to umpires. Because, you know, that was in my first game. Jeff Crouch and let's say a boundary umpire came round, took the time out to come round, a young kid playing his first game.
It's amazing.
It is, isn't it?
Probably didn't report Tassie Johnson though for the shirt front. That was all
don't know.
Fair in love and war in those days.
I've never told anybody about that Jeff Crouch thing, but I know that whenever I ran into Tassie Johnson in a function, I made sure I never spoke to him. And I thought, being a Tasmanian, why would you do that? Why would you run through another Tasmanian kid who was built like, you know, like that, skinny, and he was a big muscle man. So I had my thoughts about him, about why would you do that?
School of hard knocks, wasn't it, in those days? I mean,
it was.
No one was spared.
No.
And you very quickly showed your promise at St Kilda through the first couple of years. 63, I think you made the finals, didn't you? And then you made the grand final in 65, lost to Essendon that year, and that's the year when you win the Brownlow Medal.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you'd really started to emerge as a top-line player in the competition at that stage? Because
not really, because you're only ever as good as your last game. But at the early start, after 3 games with St Kilda in my first year, I was moved into the centre. And there was a very, very good centreman, Lance Oswald, was moved to the wing. And I thought, what the hell are they doing? This bloke's twice as good as me. So during that period, I was sort of first year, I was playing on players like Jack Clark, Hassan Mann, Brendan Edwards. They're in the centre. So I wasn't dominating. All I could do was to, get some of the ball. So I wasn't really, they were older. They were at probably the latter part of their career, and I was at the beginning, and I was playing reasonable, promising. That's all. So I played on some champions early days, and if I did well on them, I was happy. But no way did I dominate them. No way.
So 65, when you win the Brownlow Medal, how did
you?
Bit
of surprise.
Yeah.
I think, was it a surprise? Yes, it was a surprise. Well, I didn't pay much attention to the Brownlow Medal. And it was never in the front of my mind. I was interested in doing well in the best and fairest. That was always my goal. If I'd voted well in the club best and fairest. If the club people thought that you're doing all right, that was enough. The Brownlow Medal was sort of a bit like being a very, very junior actor and thinking about the Oscar. Or the Oscars. I never thought about it.
So how did you find out you'd won the 65 Brownlow?
I was at my girlfriend's place, a girlfriend at the time, in Seaford. And I was there. Actually, I had the flu, or virus, and I was in bed, separate rooms, though, of course. And I was in bed, and so it was a bit of a shock. So then they phone calls, and then I was wished back to Festival Hall. And Ron Casey was doing the fights there, and they got you up into the ring. And then they announced it from there. They did that a few times in that era, yeah. But it was a surprise.
And what about 66, the premiership year? You win it again.
Did okay. I have only ever seen the replay of the 66 grand final once fully. That's only recently. I did see quarters of it going back. I sort of kept on wanting to move on. Thinking about the next game and the next season, When you get older, you realise it, but you don't actually take it on board that much when you're playing.
Gosh, you must look back on it now and be so proud of what you achieved.
I tell you what, I used to be a little bit embarrassed because somebody who I thought I knew was a lot better player than I was.
Darryl Baldock.
Yeah, and well, he's one of the greatest players ever played. He's never got the recognition he should have got. One of the reasons I think is because he was a Tasmanian. He never cultivated the press, and the press were very pro their own homegrown footballers who were champions, but
66, the overall year, and winning a premiership for St Kilda for the first time, and still as we chat here now, the only premiership. Can you talk about the feeling around that, the experience of the day and the aftermath?
St Kilda was a community. Quite a few ethnic people lived around there, so the community warmed to it because there's water on one side, and then you've got the city on the other side, St Kilda. It was, everybody there embraced it, and they were getting older, and they'd had no success. A lot of them were from overseas, their supporters. had been through tough times, like St Kilda had been, you know, the countries that they came from, and there was a lot of emotion. And the joy that that win brought so many people, the joy that, the look on their faces was incredible, and the love they got out of it. And I'm sure it applies to other clubs, but that particular time for what St Kilda had been through, there was a hell of a lot of turmoil about where they played, where they didn't play, this and that. And our supporter base was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah.
What did it mean to you?
I got more pleasure out of seeing what it gave other people. You know, I mean, I know what it meant, but you don't think about it much after it's all over. You think about teammates, and that's meant a lot, because you're a lifelong friend of theirs, and you've got a very strong bond, a very strong bond. Yeah. What it means to you is really what it means to a group of you, and it means a lot to a group of them, a lot.
And that imagery of Darryl standing up there with that premiership cup.
Yeah. And what he had to go through with injuries to play. And a lot of the pressure that he was on, like all great players, especially a forward, the pressure that he was under, allowed other players to have a bit more latitude. Many times Darryl played on 2 and 3 backmen, coming in and hitting him with... When Darryl passed away, Cowboy Neil rang me and said, look, if you want to catch up with Doc, you better make it quick. So I went over there, and it was just a week or so before he died. And we talked, and he had tears in his eyes, and so did I. And we shook hands. The strength in his hands, I couldn't believe. I said, now I know. I didn't realise how strong physically you were. And then you look at his body, it was like a farmer. He was strong around the back and strong here, strong in the hips. And I said, I've never realised the strength that you had. And he got belted. He got belted. He never once criticised a player with lesser ability than he, never once. And when sometimes I was a little bit critical of the coach, Doc just nodded his head, you know, so he's very loyal.
Yeah, Alan Jeans, your relationship with him, I've read a bit about it, and ultimately you sort of fell out of love with the game a little bit. And I did wonder whether it had partly coincided with Darryl going back to Tasmania as well, whether that had played a part.
That didn't help.
What were you... So the move to Richmond's well documented with the trade for Billy Barrett. In your own words, how do you describe the move from St Kilda, how it came about and your arrival at Richmond?
The move was like the movie The Sting. It was set up and orchestrated by Alan Swab and myself. It was played out over 3 or 4 months. It meant that I had to go to Western Australia, apply for a coaching job over there. And
Claremont had offered you a big contract?
Yeah. How do you know that?
I read about it.
No. But really I was never going to go. I was wanting to go to... I was Richmond. Alan Swab was the assistant secretary to Ian Drake at the time at St Kilda. Then he went to Richmond. He's a wonderful CEO, Alan Swab, brilliant. And Richmond were growing tired of Billy for one reason or another. St Kilda had grown tired of me for one reason or another. I'd grown tired of them, and the name was floated, and they thought they were losing myself. And yes, why not another centre man? Well, yeah, great. So, but it was orchestrated by Swabby and myself.
Because at the time you thought St Kilda would have to clear you to Richmond, and the only way of getting around that was to say, well, I'm going to leave and play in Western Australia.
More or less. And we made judgment on some of the people at St Kilda, and we thought, let a high official at St Kilda know Billy might be available. That was floated to that high official. He then took that to the match committee, thinking that it was his idea, and he was pushing for it. And then everybody sort of said, well, okay, why not? Well, that's how it eventuated. We used people's ego to set up a sting. Did you ever see the movie?
Yeah, I have seen the
movie. Great movie, isn't it? Great movie. Great movie.
So you almost immediately rediscover your best form at Richmond as well. So was it part motivation for you? What turned for you when you got to Richmond? Because you win the Brownlow again.
I trained hard with a training coach who had a lot of footballers, John Tolman. Very good, preparing you. Trained hard. I wanted to prove that I wasn't finished. The last couple of years at St Kilda, I had injuries and that, and we used to play with injuries and with needles, you know, in the groin, right in the groin and right in the ankle, and we played regularly, not only me, a lot of players played, and so you're losing a bit of interest. You're playing regularly with injuries, you know. So it's easy to lose a little bit of enthusiasm. Easy, and
did you fall
you
out
went.
With genes?
Yes, I did. Yes, yeah.
Why do you think that happened?
I was undisciplined, and I was sort of. I was undisciplined. I was a bit of a wild boy, quietly wild. One of those guys that didn't like discipline, but remonstrated in a quiet way, not boisterous. So I'd be anti-hierarchy.
How would you rebel against it?
I don't know. Well, I did rebel. I know that. I remember those incidents, but I was undisciplined. We'd won a premiership. We'd played in the grand finals. We'd won finals. You'd reach the top, the mountain. You reach the top. I suppose I got probably a bit carried away with my ability. I was made captain, but I continually disagreed with the coach at selection committee. Now, looking back on it, I should have shut my mouth. Nothing. Who was I to say? Alan's views I disagreed with, but who am I to disagree with the coach? And that came up in the meetings, and the next year I wasn't captain, so he couldn't handle it, I couldn't handle it. I didn't think, at that time I thought I knew I was a better tactician, not a coach, tactician, tactical things on the ground. Alan had strengths. He'd spent a long time in the police force. Wasn't a lot of lateral thinking. Not a lot. But with football, I thought I could think outside.
Yeah. What about Hafey? Was he good for you, Tom Hafey?
Complete opposite. Complete opposite. I didn't know that at the time, how opposite he was, but he was all embracing with everybody. He lost a bit of that when you couldn't play, but while you could play, he had a lot of empathy, he was a people's person before he coached Shepparton. He worked at a milk bar in Richmond, you know, and that came through.
So you go from kicking lace-out passes to Darryl Baldock, your hero, and then all of a sudden you're kicking lace-out passes to another champion Tasmanian centre-half forward in Royce Hart.
Do you know, at the time I thought of that, I realised that because I'm a great admirer of Royce Hart, great admirer of Royce's champion. I realised that, and so did Royce, because after a game, and he used to say, "Who's the better player, Stewie?" And because, as you know, Royce wrote a book about himself when he's 21. Remember that one? So he didn't lack any confidence. So I'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Doc's a better player." And then as the season went on, and Royce used to continually ask me, and then one particular night, after the game, he played a blind, I think 5 or 6 goals, centre-half forward, 60 metres out, they're all massive. And he said, "Who's the better player now, Stewie?" I said, "You've caught him." He said, "Have I?" This is about 8 o'clock at night. I said, "You've caught him." He said, "Thanks, Stewie." He loved that.
Did you genuinely think it?
Did I? Not quite. Not quite. But I thought I owed it to Royce. Royce was an out-and-out champion.
Yeah. Well,
there's only one Darryl Baldock, though.
71 Brownlow, 73 Premiership. How do you reflect on your time at Richmond?
Loved it. I loved it. They embraced me from the moment I got there. They were that sort of club. I think they're well known for that. They embraced you. Tommy trained everybody very, very hard. I had a deal with the club that after 1 hour's heavy training I could go off the ground. I said, "I just can't handle it." And so at 6 o'clock I'd just disappear. And Tommy said, "That's all right." He said, I said, "There's somebody that trains less than me." He said, "Who's that?" I said, "Your mate, Kevin Bartlett." You could have a joke with Tommy. He didn't mind. And the players got to know about it after a while because it was in the dark and he'd disappear at 6 o'clock. I'd be doing exercise, and as we'd go round near the race, I was gone. And another time when I went to Richmond, these are the things happened regularly. When I went to Richmond, there was a function at Tommy's place. Tommy was a non-drinker, and the players were a little bit apprehensive of him. Well, me being a little bit older, I wasn't. I was a bit undisciplined, so I organised when we were at Tommy's place to go, some of the players go and leave and get some grog. And we went and bought some grog, brought it back to Tommy's place, hid it in the garden. And every now and then, players would disappear going out to the garden. And Tommy, "Where's everybody?" And he had soft drinks and nuts, to eat and drink. Soft drink and nuts. Well, the players had played a hard game and they weren't interested in soft drink and nuts. And Tommy didn't worry him, got over it, he knew. And Graham Richmond, another leader of the club, the leader, the godfather, he never drank either. They tried very hard, the Richmond players, they played very hard. They also enjoyed themselves. They weren't quite a rat pack, but they were heading that way. I wasn't a leader of the pack, I was in the pack.
Yeah.
I was a follower.
Well, of course, you then later in life go on to become a coach. So with all that you'd learnt and knowing the way you'd behaved and perhaps a slight anti-authority attitude at times, what was it like transitioning to be the coach of South Melbourne?
That was pretty interesting. It was tough. That's tough caper. The club was going through, they were broke, that's why they went to Sydney. I was involved in those years before. They were a very, very good bunch of guys, underpaid and late payments, who gave their all. There were wonderful camaraderie there and team spirit, wonderful. And I had a number of people I surrounded myself with that were very strong, that went on and had a lot of success in the things that they did afterwards. It's a very good club.
Yeah.
And could you see that the writing was on the wall? The club was going to move to Sydney as they did in '82?
Well, I was, in a small way, one of the instigators, because when we had no money to pay the players, I would go around and see Craig Kimberley, who was the president, and Just Jeans, and ask him for money so I could pay the players. So Barry Rand came to me, he was the captain, and he'd say, "Where's the money? You know, the players have got mortgages and that." So I'd ring Craig, and Craig was very, very generous, unbelievably. And he'd give me 20 grand, which is equivalent of about 200 now. And I'd give it to the treasurer, and he'd pay the players that had commitments. And so we had to go somewhere, you know. And so yeah, and I coached them the year before they left, and then I supported the new coach to be Ricky Quaid.
Yes.
And they then went to Sydney, and Quaid ended up the coach. So I was heavily involved in the preliminary of that, because I could see that you can't run a club, and every period when we ran out of money, we'd sell a fringe player, get 20 or 30 grand for him, and that would pay the players. So we lived like that for years. But it also built up this wonderful camaraderie, you know, survival again. Yeah.
You got them back into the finals in your first year there.
Yeah, we played that finals that year. We played, had a great. Everybody gave 100%, and I suppose that camaraderie is something that you'd like to develop in this new club, Tasmanian new club.
That's a great segue, because I wanted to go there next and talk to you about Tasmania and what it'll be. First and foremost, the Tasmania Devils, they're going to be called, and they're going to wear the Tasmanian state jumper. So that's going to be the foundation jumper that the team will wear. What do you think about that, Ian?
Well, is the devil extinct or the tiger? Which one's...
The tiger.
Tiger's extinct.
Yes.
Well, I don't worry about names or jumpers a lot, but that's a Tasmanian jumper. That's a great jumper. But how you set it up, that's the thing. And the selections that you make, it lasts forever. I've been in business for a long time, especially at the end of the football, right through now. I'm still working now. Football's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's a lot harder than business. And if you look back through that, you see some very outstanding business people that didn't do well in the football club. So it's harder, believe me. So if you make the right decisions and the right appointments now, it'll flow.
So presuming the club is set up the right way, how would that make you feel to see that those Tasmanian colours that you wore as a young kid when you played on Alistair Lord represented in the AFL?
I don't know how, but I know that whenever I hear of a player that's from Tasmania and playing, I watch him closely. You know, whether it's Fox from the Sydney Swans, who I didn't know was from Tasmania. The most recent game as a young guy, I think his name's Campbell for Richmond.
Seth Campbell.
And I said, geez, but I watched them much, much closer, and I take an interest in there as soon as I know they're from Tasmania. And I like to see Tasmanians succeed. I very quickly say to people, yeah, but he's a Tasmanian.
Ian Stewart, what a story he has to tell. When we chatted on his farm at Woodend in Victoria, news of Brendan Gale's appointment as the inaugural CEO of the Tasmania Devils had not yet been made public. But Stewart told me privately he was the man to go for, the perfect man for the job. I hope you enjoyed hearing Ian's story. It was a genuine honour to speak with him. There are plenty more episodes of The Heart of It, telling the stories of other outstanding Tasmanians, available to you now. Just look for The Heart of It on all your usual podcast platforms or at tasmaniafc.com. I'm Alistair Nicholson. Thanks for listening.